This was a really tough decision. And when they make it personal, that's when because we've left 90% of our content is controversial.
Yeah, we get
and
a lot
don't
of like
intend it
sexualized death threats.
But then when that stuff comes in and if they bring my kids in or anything like that, like shutting that right down.
It's frequently said that doctors aren't scientists and we need to stop speaking as if we were scientists. Well, my next two guests are both scientists. Please welcome Dr. Steyer and Dr. Love to the show, hosts of the Unbiased Science podcast, to debate that very point. And when I say debate, it's more like discuss, because we not only discuss that, my RSV controversy, all the topics that exist in the health and wellness space surrounding natural supplements, natural cures, and is inflammation to blame for all of our problems? This is going to be a really contentious, exciting, educational, and even collaborative conversation. So please enjoy. Let's get started with the checkup. I have two scientists in front of me. I am not a scientist, but I feel like doctors like to think of themselves as scientists. It feels like you have a controversial stance on this, at least within our community of doctors.
Correct.
Who wants to take first stab at proving why I'm not a scientist?
Well, I think the thing is that some clinicians are scientists, but not all clinicians are scientists. And the public just automatically assumes that all clinicians are scientists. But I mean, you could speak to this better than we can. My husband's an ER doc, and he always says he had no formal training in epidemiology and data science and how to critically appraise evidence. You don't get training in that. So yes, you have clinical expertise, but do you all know, do you? I mean, I don't know. Do you know how to really read and critically appraise research?
I would like to take a step back.
Okay, sorry.
No. This is a good place to be. But for the audience, what is your definition of what a scientist is versus a clinician?
Okay, that's a very good question.
So I can jump in. I think there is a difference. So I think clinicians can often be called like applied scientists, right? So you're taking scientific information, things that have been designed, developed, evaluated by trained scientists, basic scientists, you could call them, and are using it to apply to treatment of a single individual. Whereas scientists, by and large, are looking at population level information. Right. They're designing studies in order to evaluate or investigate a given phenomenon or an observation. And then they're evaluating the data that they collect to make generalizations or interpretations of the body at large. And that could be an entire human population. It could be a population of cells in a petri dish. It could be a population of animals. But it's very different because you're making these broad conclusions based on a comprehensive body of evidence as opposed to tailoring the knowledge that's been created by scientists in order to apply it to a single individual, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Now, why is it on a practical level an issue when a doctor starts treating themselves as a scientist when they don't have the background knowledge to do so?
Well, I think the biggest thing comes down to the training in study design and interpretation of the data. So a lot of times clinicians are going to be provided clinical recommendations, right, from a variety of credentialed organizations that provide clinical guidance, right? Like you're not expected to pull out treatment plans, out of a hat, as it were, right? There are a lot of standard procedures, not to say that there aren't exceptions, right? Certain cases, and that's why, you collaborate and have differential diagnoses and try and, investigate the problem. But there's not a lot of formal training with regard to, okay, is this study designed in a way that will appropriately evaluate the question at hand? Are we actually collecting the data that need to be collected? Are there variables that may skew these data that we're not accounting for? And, that's totally fine because people can't be trained in everything, right? There are reasons that there are specific fields of expertise. And that's why scientists and clinicians really need to work together to do that.
Yes.
Because just like clinicians, we're not going to go treat people. Right. We're not going to go make treatment recommendations. We're going to say, okay, well, the data support this as a treatment for X, Y, and Z, or the data do not support, the evidence for the treatment of X, Y, or Z.
The way that I'll put this on a practical perspective is if I have a patient in front of me and I am a clinician, I'm a doctor, I am going to diagnose the patient based on my evaluation of what's going on, which includes a history, a physical, potentially some tests. And then my treatment plan will come from the evidence that was collected by scientists, that was evaluated by scientists. And therefore, these clinical guidelines that were sort of laid out for me, I go off of those.
Yeah.
Right.
And I feel like good quality clinicians, which is myself, would go, not saying that I'm a good quality physician, but meaning the clinician is myself, will base their decisions more so off good evidence-based data,
Right.
as opposed to just solely their experience.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. And we just want to say, like, we are pro-clinician. Like, I think a lot of times we're pitted against clinicians, and
Right.
that's why I'm so happy that we're tackling this. Because it's like people assume that there's a hierarchy and that clinicians are at the top and we're just somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's not the case. You guys are amazing. You're experts in treatment and, diagnosis and treatment and all that. But you're not necessarily trained in the scientific process. And so, like Andrea was saying, people can put anything they want. Like, you could publish anything, but we've been trained to understand the quality of the evidence. And that's like the eye. That's how we approach all the information that we consume is, okay, what are the threats to the validity and the reliability of this? Is this generalizable, or is this just an anecdote? Is this an outlier? What's the body of evidence? What's the scientific consensus?
Of course.
And that's where I think the difference lies.
Yeah.
But I do want to also make the point, and I know, Ethan and I even spoke about this. So Ethan's
my
her husband. Yep.
Shout out to
ER
Ethan.
doctor.
Yes.
Dr. Ethan Chapin. So, he has come up against this as a younger clinician, where some of the older, more entrenched clinicians are very, intractable in this expertise-based or experience-based practice, as opposed to an evidence-based practice. And younger clinicians, more, newer generations of clinicians are really looking more to the science, which is great to see, because that's how it should be working together, right? But we saw a lot of this during COVID and during a lot of other medical issues. But, a lot of people, you can publish an opinion piece in prestigious journals, and the general public doesn't know how to discern, this is an opinion piece with no data to support it, and it happens to be in a journal name I recognize, versus a very well-designed study with an appropriate number of sample subjects, appropriate number of controls, whatever the case happens to be. And they're really unable to discern, like, well, why is this one credible and this one isn't when they're in the same journal?
Absolutely. I don't think it's one or the other, because when I get general guidelines, population-based guidelines on what I should do for a given patient, I have to remember that is not given to that patient.
Yes.
Because if that was the case, AI would just diagnose and treat everybody.
Right.
But the reality is, medicine is the science and art. That's what I think differentiates a clinician. They have to incorporate that art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where in the lab, if you're doing art stuff, maybe that's a problem, actually. So I think the human is part of the art form.
Yeah.
So while I may know, I'll just finish the point. I may know that this is what's recommended for patient A,
Right.
but I know patient A has a bias, or they've experienced something with this negatively, and I know they won't buy into this yet, and I have to take an extra visit for this. I can adapt the research that you've provided me into an individual.
Exactly.
piece of
And I
advice.
think that really comes to the crux of all, like, science and health in general, is that it's multifactorial.
Yep.
Yes.
And too often people get hung up on this, like, singular anecdote and not realizing that there's a lot of other factors in play, and what works for a single individual does not necessarily mean that is, the de facto data-driven evidence.
And I've seen a lot of clinicians get frustrated with scientists and these guidelines, because it's like, I'm the clinician. I'm sitting in front of the patient. I know their history, like the nuance of their clinical background or whatever. Like, why should I follow a guideline? I'm the clinician. And so working in data science, like you mentioned, AI and machine learning, and there's all these amazing things that I think are going to come out in the next few years, where we could figure out, okay, this patient has a probability of success or of being discharged if we follow XYZ protocol. But we always have to work in conjunction with the clinician. I don't think personally, and I know, Andrea, I don't speak for you, but I think you agree, that should never supersede your clinical judgment, but we're a team. And I think, like, that thinking needs to change. Like, we're often pitted against clinicians, but we are a team.
No, the
Yes.
team aspect is absolutely right. The multifactorial thing is right, because multifactorial is probably the answer for all of these things that we're going to be discussing today.
Right?
Nuance, as Jonathan Haidt said actually on my channel, is a superpower that we need to
and is lacking in many
most people.
Yes.
I will say, to play a little devil's advocate, older clinicians will oftentimes rely too heavily on anecdote and their experience, and therefore less so on evidence-based medicine. I have seen that pattern. At the same time, I have seen a new pattern in my younger residents that I'm training that are very focused on the evidence-based information and guidance, so much so that they forget that there's a human sitting in front of them.
Yep.
So that's where the like boots on the ground thing, and why I think collaboration between scientists and clinicians needs to happen more often when we're making clinical guidelines, when we're making legal decisions on what is covered in insurance plans and pharmaceutical plans and all that. So I feel like being the clinician, the thing that I'm seeing on my side is both ends of the spectrum and the pendulum constantly swinging one way or another, and constantly trying to bring it into homeostasis and back into the middle somehow.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
I totally agree. I mean, you could certainly see, someone who's so fixated on what do the data say and they forget a very potentially critically important key detail of patient history, right? And that could lead them to a misdiagnosis. And so, I mean, in medicine, you need both of those things.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think that's cool. And to answer the question that we started with, I think there's a wide spectrum of how doctors learn research and science in the first 2 years of medical training.
Right.
Some get a heavy lecture on it. Some get a very glossed over sort of summary of it. But then in residency training is where I see either a strong emphasis from the program where they're learning and they have journal club and they have times where they're dissecting weaknesses of articles and research that has been put out. And there's such a wide variability.
Right.
So I think it's difficult to pan down and say all doctors are not good at research or they are. And when we do say doctors aren't scientists, the problem that comes up is then the skeptics of medicine come in and use that as an entryway and say, your doctor doesn't know what they're talking about. I know the science. And most people don't have the time and the energy and the dense informational background to know the difference, as you said, between two different opinion articles or research articles. And they're left confused.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, to play devil's advocate on the other side, you obviously get the people who say, I know the science when they in fact do not know the science. And that can be true even for scientists, right? There are scientists that, we've seen it a lot in the Twitterverse where they are going outside of their field of expertise and they're misinterpreting the conclusion of a study because it's not in their scope of knowledge. And that's true for scientists, clinicians, general public, I mean, everywhere in between. So I think, that's why there has to be collaboration and that's why there has to be discussion and, constant evaluation of rigor of data that's emerging.
Agreed. And this brings us nicely to our point of how we met. Do you remember how we came to...
I remember. So
did I slide into DMs?
No, Dr. Mike.
Yes, there was a DM.
Yeah, well, kind of. I think it was me that slid into the DMs. Okay. So you were a guest, or you had a guest on your show, and you were talking about the RSV surge, and you were discussing how there was an increased proportion of hospitalizations or severe illness because there was this
timing shift.
Timing shift, exactly. What we can call the exposure, exposure gap, not immunity gap, everyone. We've covered that already. But the fact that the first time a child gets RSV is most often the most severe time. Right. And you got a lot of flack from people about that.
Actually,
from clinicians.
Immunologists. No, not from clinicians.
Oh, from scientists.
From scientists.
Whoa.
So it was actually heavy from the science community.
Very interesting.
And they were using the same talking points that you're saying right now, which is interesting and why I really want to discuss this.
Okay.
Because they were saying he clearly doesn't understand. He's a clinician, not a scientist.
And I remember I slid into his DMs and I said...
Before the drama started.
And I was like, I appreciate your take on this. And I sent him our video about,
debunking
why there are
immunity death.
why there's such a surge of respiratory viruses this season, and a lot, the multifactorial aspect of it, right?
Absolutely.
We have, the COVID burnout. People are going back to pre-pandemic behaviors. You have routine circulation of a lot of respiratory viruses. And I think, it was just like, it was like a commiseration sort of thing initially.
What was frustrating about it was that I said in opening my statement that this is one of the leading theories.
Right.
Essentially saying that this is multifactorial.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
but there's no nuance.
No.
Yeah. and then I asked you, even after the critique started, do you think I said something wrong that I need to issue a correction?
Right. And
because I want to, as a clinician, put out accurate scientific info.
So you're absolutely correct. Typically, a lot of these I don't want to say childhood illness, because of course adults can get RSV as well. But these illnesses that are typically more severe in childhood, influenza, RSV, otitis media, a lot of these things, right?
Yep.
Your first interaction with that pathogen is most often, and I don't want to say always, because
of course.
it's multifactorial.
Yes,
Things change throughout the course of someone's life.
Yeah.
But very often,
in fact, most often RSV is fine. Kids do fine with that. So that's what reassurance for parents.
Correct.
Because as a clinician, I'm also worried about the parent being
So,
worried that if they
for the most part,
RSV.
it's generally mild. But your first interaction, your first encounter with that virus typically leads to the most severe illness presentation. And so if there are kids, not that their immune systems are compromised from not being exposed to it, but it's just the first time they've seen it, it will often be more severe than the next time they see it. Now, that's because we don't develop full immunity, long-term immunity to RSV, and that's why you can get infected repeatedly. However, you have there's a lot of different components of the immune system, right? You have the innate immune system, which doesn't have any memory, and it's always there to patrol. But then you have different arms of memory immunity, and some of those taper off more quickly and some do not. And so you can still get sick, but it's typically less severe in future encounters. But nothing of what you said was incorrect. There's a lot of factors at play this year.
Yeah, the immunologists were pointing out that they're saying the size of the airways changing as the child gets older is the reason for the second illness being less bad. And that's true. We don't disagree.
There's
it's one of the reasons.
Yes, exactly.
Multifactorial.
Also, general development of the immune system occurs as people age.
Course.
Right.
So, and that also goes the other direction, right? You have a peak and then you have a valley when you have immune senescence. So then older people, their immune system is less
waning,
responsive and they now have similar risk factors as you would as a younger person.
Can I just say, I think it was awesome how you went about, like, you reached out and you really wanted input and you were open to, are there any inaccuracies? And I feel like what's so interesting about what we're doing, it's so public.
Yeah.
And when these scientists or clinicians, whatever, it's like clinician on scientist violence, like they do it so publicly. And then think about what the public is seeing.
Exactly. That's my concern.
Right?
About it.
Right.
It like totally discredits everything that we're doing. It's like a journal club or a peer review process, but like in front of an audience eating popcorn.
Yeah.
Like scientific discourse is normal. It's encouraged. It's the beauty of science, right? But now that it's all playing out in the public eye, they're like, oh look, this is wrong. They can't get it together. There's such disagreement, and I just feel like it erodes public trust in science and medicine.
And also, like, when you're a professional in the field, clinician, scientist, whatever, when you're on social media, what is your purpose? You have to think about, what is your purpose? Are you just trying to have a pissing match with another person in the field to make yourself feel better or feel smarter? Or are you trying to do something for the general good of society, right? If it's the latter, then what is your point of calling someone out publicly? If you have a critique about what they're saying, message them privately. You don't need to go and dogpile them to make yourself feel better. That's completely unproductive and, as Jess said, erodes public trust in both science and medicine.
Yeah. And I think if the goal is evidence-based medicine and getting people to buy in, you should avoid that at all costs.
Exactly.
Exactly.
We have to get our act together. Honestly, like I feel like COVID really lit a fire, and there are so many of us out there who are now in SciComm and in the public eye. But like, I don't know, there's not a whole lot of kumbaya behind the scenes. At least it hasn't been for us. I don't know if I know it hasn't necessarily always been the case.
Tell me about a time where that's happened.
Well, so we've gotten a lot of messages from people who have seen people, and we're not super active on Twitter. I'll just kind of preface that. We do most of our work on Instagram, and we do have the weekly podcast. But every now and then, and Jess is kind of forcing us into the Reels world and TikTok.
Sorry.
I mean, that's where the world is going.
Right?
Yeah.
And TikTok.
Jess is just facilitating the transition.
I want to hide my face. I'm a scientist. I'm going to go hide in the lab with my coat and my sweatpants.
You just also happen to be beautiful, and I think it would be nice to be got your face on social media. But okay, go on.
But anyway, so we have gotten a lot of messages from people who follow the podcast page because, again, our page is really geared towards providing content for the general public. It's not really designed for complex scientific discourse, like let's talk about toll-like receptor signaling and how it activates interferon regulatory factors.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
That's not.
I am not. I regret saying I was a scientist at the beginning.
So that's like the Twitterverse of like the scientist, right?
I raise you a TNF alpha.
Follow some interfering gamma. So anyways, we got a lot of messages from people who were so concerned with a lot of these articles coming out about post-COVID and long COVID and how it was leading to immunodeficiency. And people are likening it to HIV and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And I was like, I just wanted to alleviate people's concerns that there's no body of evidence to support primary immunodeficiency after COVID. And in fact, even these temporary changes in immune cell populations are totally normal.
All right, well, I got to set this up because what you're saying is really important.
Okay.
And if we don't set it up, this might go over people's heads because I feel it going over my head, and yet I already know what you're saying. Okay. There is a concern.
Yes.
This is the problem. We're going to set the table. The problem is people are worried that after COVID, their immune systems are going to be weakened.
Correct.
The theory is potentially kids are having worsening RSV spikes because they've been sick with COVID.
Right.
So what has the evidence shown us on a practical level from experiencing COVID to what happens to our immune systems after?
So there's a lot of different things that happen, and that's the challenge, right? Yeah. So there are some data that suggests that some of the persistent symptoms of what we're calling long COVID, which is the post-acute sequelae of the infection, can be due to overactive or hyperactive immune responses, meaning you have persistent populations of T cells, inflammatory populations of T cells that are leading to inflammation, that is then leading to some of these symptoms that people are reporting. There's also some data that suggests
so some data says there's inflammation happening after you're sick with COVID.
Right. And that might lead to...
And you might have some symptoms as a result. And then there's some data
There's some data that also suggests that some people memory immune system is less responsive, which is one of some of the theory behind why people are getting sick more frequently with other respiratory viruses that are always circulating. And then there's some data that suggests that there are no long-term changes or persistent changes for other people. And that is kind of what you would expect after a viral infection. There are going to be some populations that have one response, some populations that have the other extreme, and then some in the middle, right? Okay. It's a bell curve. And so, unfortunately, a lot of media outlets and professionals on Twitter have kind of leaned into one of those directions and really harping on this, like long COVID is destroying your immune system and leading to immunodeficiency, and it's suppressing your immune responses.
On par with HIV.
Correct.
Really
on
spreading
par
fear.
with HIV. Like
a lot of fear mongering.
Yes. A lot of fear mongering. And there are very vocal people on Twitter who are doing this. And so we wanted to simply alleviate the concerns that there are no data to suggest that
it's
COVID,
that bad.
Right. That it's that bad. That there may be temporary changes to your immune system, but that makes sense, right? Your immune system's fighting a virus, so it's going to take some damage and it's going to take a little bit of time to recover, as you would expect. But people are not getting infections, opportunistic infections that you would expect if your memory immune system was basically destroyed.
Got it. So it's not as bad as people are making it seem on that lane.
Correct.
What's the other lane that some people are going into?
Well, so what happened there was that I got called out for basically ignoring all of the data that are suggesting that there is temporary perturbations when that was not what I was saying at all. And I actually noted that there were temporary perturbations. So the fear-mongering camp of COVID is destroying everybody's immune systems and you're going to be sick forever basically dogpiled me and
They thought we were downplaying long COVID. That was the whole thing. Like, why are you downplaying this? Like, this is feeding into this idea that COVID is over. We shouldn't be concerned with it anymore.
We have never done that.
And this is the problem with social media. You have a very limited amount of time, right? Like, we had a 60-second, 90-second reel, and Andrea was responding to that fear, to the fear-mongering headlines, like, oh my goodness, 50% of people are getting long COVID. It's like HIV. Our immune systems will never be the same. And they came after her, and really, you're not even, I mean, it was vicious. People really going after her specifically. There were people who have pages dedicated to trying to take us down, and they were ripping into credentials. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced the same. And again, I mean, it's sort of interesting, like the medium as message, like the medium of social media is interfering with our ability. Like if you want a thesis on like what Andrea, obviously, you could talk for hours about this.
150-page thesis on, but that's not productive.
Right.
You know what you're experiencing right now? And I'm only smiling because you're experiencing what clinicians experience. You're trying to take a lot of complex data.
Yes.
And you're trying to simplify it into a visit.
But the challenge is but the people that are attacking, the people that actually were doing the attacking were clinicians.
Yeah, there was a very angry dermatologist.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you why I actually agree with you on your stance. Why I'm against fear-mongering specifically, and not to downplay long COVID or the temporary changes that we see in the immune system's effectiveness post-COVID. Because the human mind is so powerful, and it really shouldn't be mind and body, it should be mind-body, that if I plant the seed in either one patient or in many patients by talking on social media that their immune system is weakened, their immune system gets weakened.
That's actually true.
Yes.
I agree with you. And okay, so this
Isn't that wild?
Wild. But it's 100% true because we know, again, multifactorial,
word of the day.
Stress hormones, cortisol, there's a whole lot of pathways that get activated, but your endocrine system feeds into your immune system. Your immune system is involved in every bodily system that exists.
Yep.
So everything, there's interplay. And this is actually a struggle I'm having with the long COVID because there is no clinical diagnostic criteria. There is a giant encyclopedia long list of symptoms that are associated with long COVID, many of which can be associated with the fact that we've all been living in a pandemic that is traumatic.
Absolutely.
And people have PTSD and people have depression because they've been locked in their home. Is that actually a consequence of a viral infection? You can't say that because there's no way to parse that out. And so all of these things are getting lumped into the umbrella of long COVID. And that is, I think, in some ways inflating the numbers of people that are reporting saying that they have long COVID. Because if you look at the actual biology of this virus, yes, it can do some damage. For sure. We have never downplayed that. We actually have a lot of posts on long COVID and COVID in general and highly encourage people to get vaccinated and take mitigation measures. But there is no robust body of data that suggests that physiologically plausible that, all of these things are going to be associated with all of these people who had COVID.
And it's like correlation doesn't equal causation, we always say. Just because it happens after you had COVID, it doesn't mean it's because of COVID or it's long COVID. And anytime we try to articulate that, people come for us because they feel like we're downplaying.
I feel like in medicine, what ends up happening is you have arguments over nomenclature. Like, what word did you choose to describe this given? When in reality, we're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
We are on the same team.
Yeah.
You might think this is 5%. I might think it's 7%. But the difference doesn't matter. And I think what is created is like a very tribalistic situation where there are ulterior motives to argue about the 5 to 7% difference. And then the person that suffers in all of this is not the person like you getting attacked or the person doing the attacking, but the viewer, the average person who's trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
So out of the interest of that, we actually ended up taking down that particular post because...
Oh, I feel bad that you guys did that.
I mean...
honestly, the only reason we did it... And
they were doxing me.
They were really doxing her. They were coming for her hard.
But then now you've empowered them to say, if they dox you hard enough, you can do it again.
Well, no, but the reason we took it down is because we want to do a more comprehensive summary
Well, you could have done that as well and left that one up.
No, I know this was a tough. This was a really tough decision. And when they make it personal, that's when because we've left all 90% of our content is controversial.
Yeah, we get
and
a lot
don't
of like
intend it to be.
sexualized death threats.
But then when that stuff comes in and if they bring my kids in or anything like that, like shutting that down, you know?
But normally, like, we have no problem arguing, you know,
Right.
publicly or not. But it was more because the whole thread just completely lost track of like the purpose of it. It was not for some clinicians to get into a pissing match. It was, we were trying to alleviate a very specific concern that, you know, people are afraid now, right? Because the public health emergency, it's ending.
Lifted, right.
Nobody's wearing masks. Only 15% of people have gotten the bivalent booster. So there are people that have a lot of health anxiety and they're afraid to leave their house. And so we're literally trying to alleviate and be like, it's okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's inevitable, but right now with, you know, XBB 1.5, like it's going to spread pretty quickly. But we don't want people to have this overwhelming paralytic fear that if they get COVID, they're never going to be the same. Not to say that there's not bad outcomes, but vaccination, booster, all of those things can improve, you know, improve your outcome or reduce the risk of severe outcomes.
Can I say one other thing? I feel like how we try to set ourselves apart from some other scientists, SciComm pages, is that we're obviously, yes, we're scientists first, but we're also practical, and it's like real life. Like, you know, like people really came for us when we said like we're not necessarily masking all the time. Like this is when there was a real lull. It's like real life. Like I have young kids. Like we're slowly returning to normalcy, going to restaurants, and a lot of scientists and people in the SciComm community were like, "How irresponsible of you!" And it's like we're being practical.
But what's interesting is there's a level of hypocrisy there from people that are pretending like there's perfect levels of protection that exist.
Right.
And then you'll even see Dr. Fauci, who's on my channel a couple of times. We're talking about appropriate levels of risk for you might not be what's an appropriate level of risk for you.
That's what we try and talk about a lot is that, you know, if I lived with a family member that was really high risk, I would be doing
changing
things
your behavior.
Exactly.
But there's some people where it's an all or none. And initially early in the pandemic when we didn't know anything about this virus, like
of course.
I was very cautious.
I didn't leave my house for the first few months.
I stopped hosting group runs outside because we didn't yet know how quickly this could spread even outdoors.
My husband lived in he's an ER doc. We got an Airbnb for him. He showered outside. Like he was literally like writing his will. Like we thought it was like end of days. No one knew what was going on.
Well, that's what the problem is. They start kidnapping the information from what you said, you know, when the pandemic first started to what's going on now.
You lied.
You lied.
Right.
But it's no,
science has evolved.
It's not
That's
even,
what science is.
Like our knowledge evolved, science evolved, all those things changed.
Data has emerged.
Outside safety.
But
like
what's
a lot of things
interesting
changed.
is that there are some SciComm pages who are still like very militant about a lot of things, like the mask wearing and almost shaming. Like, how dare you go to the supermarket
Let's
without
talk
a
about the
mask?
shaming, because I think this is smart. Because let's go back to the goal. If this person's goal from a psychological perspective is to increase masking, and throughout the years of practicing medicine, we know shaming does not work. We saw it with the HIV pandemic. We see it with vaccine hesitancy. You shame, you break lines of communication, you don't help anyone.
Yep. Right.
So what are your theories as to why people are shaming? If there are evidence-based people who know shaming doesn't work.
I mean, you know,
is it emotional?
Yes.
Very emotional. I was going to say it's emotional. You know, they've kind of dug their heels in about this given topic, and I think it's a gap in effective communication skills. They don't know another way to communicate that someone should be wearing a mask aside from this kind of shame rhetoric.
I also feel like we're not academics. I worked briefly in clinical academia, but we're not academics. And I feel like the academic approach to the non-academic approach is very different. Like there's a lot of pride, a lot of like ivory tower type approach. And I feel like they take a stance and they just double down, you know, but I think, so I would say, yes, I think it's very emotional, a lot of pride. They want to be an expert, you know, and for whatever reason, the black and white, very bold statements those are more impactful. Those are the things that get shared and for whatever reason. And it's so frustrating for us because we always say science is all about the gray and there's nuance. And like now I do mask if I'm going to a supermarket or whatever. And it's because there was an uptick in cases. Like things change. Like I don't see the reason that we need to double down on a particular stance. It's like, why can't we evolve? Why can't we acknowledge that there's nuance and gray? So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I mean, I have a different theory.
I want to hear.
Yeah,
sorry.
but I think it's definitely there's definitely a little bit of that ivory tower.
Yes.
Because again, I did work in academic research and now I'm not. Now I'm in biotech. That's my full-time job. But now I'm also involved in, this Lyme Disease Foundation. And, again, the goal of that is to provide, evidence to the masses as well and dispel misinformation. And I think, academics who live in that academic bubble, they don't realize that the rest of the world, there's a gap, right? Mm-hmm. There's a gap in scientific literacy. There's a gap in understanding the granularity of things.
Trust.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I think is causing it. Algorithms.
Oh, yeah. I could agree with that too.
I mean it not like this is an evil AI thing coming to get us. I think clinicians, scientists, whoever these people are that are very heels dug in, one way or the highway, have realized that if you take the stronger stance, the algorithm then will have a higher chance of recommending your content.
Totally agree.
Therefore, this is the point where I think they make the mistake. They think they're being more effective.
Yep.
Because they're saying, look, when I'm very heels dug in, I get more views. That means I'm being a better clinician, doctor, whatever. But the reality is the type of viewer you're getting there is someone who just wants to argue rather than the person's mind you actually need to change.
Right. You're becoming the clickbait.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we always say, like, just beware of any extreme statement. Like, but you're right. Like the statements like, this is going to kill you or this is going to cure you. Like those are what people want to hear. It's like, oh my goodness, here's the answer. And it's boring when we say, well,
the dose makes the poison.
Like there's sort of not exactly like sometimes that, whatever, you know what I'm getting at. And I feel like sometimes we get sucked into like, like some of our posts, and I guess I'm being a little self-critical here, like I guess people now, our followers who like our nuance are like, oh no, this is a little bit reductionist. Like you came down too hard on this and there's nuance, there's middle ground. And you're right. Yeah.
But I would argue that those posts that we do, it's because we're trying to reach other audiences.
Yes.
And it's a topic that we've already done a 2-hour podcast on, that we've already done, 10 slide carousel post on. And sometimes you need to draw in, but it's never a single format or a single type of medium.
But to your point, like we're not doing this like just for fun. Like this, what we're doing on SciComm takes a ton of time and energy and effort. And the reason we're doing it is to reach a large audience and have an impact.
You don't have to tell me. Yeah, absolutely.
Listen to that. We got to take notes from you.
No, that's why I do it as well.
That's why we're doing it.
The way that I like to think about it, because everything is reductionist to me because I'm not very smart. So I have to make everything very simple.
Okay.
So when you are in first grade, I don't know when this is actually happening, the learning, you tell kids you can't subtract 5 from 2 because they're not ready for negatives yet.
Right.
And then you have a calculus professor go into this teacher and say, you're an idiot. Of course you can. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're like 5.
But you're not there yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Not there yet.
So when you're making a piece of content and you're saying the end of the world is not here because COVID is happening.
Right.
And the researcher, that's the calculus scientist in this example, goes and starts yelling at you. You're like, dude, I know, but like, I'm trying to get this.
You have to think about your audience
and match the level of understanding. Exactly.
And that is, I think, the challenge with the academics because they're
teaching and communicating with other
academic bubble.
Yes.
They don't necessarily frame things in a way that's going to resonate with the public that's not at that level.
Well, and also, I don't know if this is getting off topic, but like the different platforms of social media, it's like they're totally different. So we're big on Instagram, which is you have an infographic, you have 10 slides and then a caption. On Facebook, it's all, what seems to do
more
better
text
is more text heavy. If you're on TikTok, it's a video. What was my point of this?
Twitter?
Twitter?
I don't know.
That some of them are different in terms of effectiveness or anger.
Well, and so what Andrea was getting at, like on Twitter, a lot of academics, like really they get into the details and it's like academics talking to academics. On Instagram, we're using infographics to
we're not trying to talk to other academics.
For the general public.
Yeah.
And then when we like cross post, that's when we get
into trouble. Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, that was
we
my
don't
point.
we don't spend a lot of time on Twitter, but like I'll go on Twitter and it's like, very reputable immunologists who are literally dissecting a paper and going through all the different cellular pathways and the inflammatory cytokines and the different populations of T cells. And it's like, that's cool. But again, what's your goal? Should that be in a med-sci room on Twitter? Like, should that be in the main feed? Like, is that adding to confusion to the general public? I think it is. Because I think what our role should be as scientists and clinicians is communicating to the audience that needs to hear it. You know, we go to conferences around, throughout the year where we can get into the nitty gritty, the granularity, the presentations, every single cellular process that's happening. We don't necessarily need Twitter as a forum for that as well,
Right. And we're focused on the takeaways, like what's going to have the most relevance for for the public. This is we're not speaking to peers necessarily, right? And we always say like, I call an architect if I want to build something. Like I'm not saying I'm better than anyone because I have a doctorate, right? But we have very specialized expertise. We went to school, we trained for a freaking decade. You know what I mean? Like we can't communicate all of the detail in all of our posts. So our goal is to distill it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, there's never been a theory or concept presented at a medical symposium that's not met with some level of debate.
Yeah, right.
But if that level of debate happened in the public every time, it would make people very confused, and that's what's playing out on
and
social
nobody
media.
would trust science or medicine as a result. And we're seeing that erosion in a very concerning rate right now, I think.
Which is why I am trying to prep the audience and educate the audience that this level of discourse is to be expected. That's my new thing on the thing on the channel, is to get people to say, okay, here's what I'm saying, and expect a level of pushback that not everyone will agree with what I'm saying, and here are the reasons for why, to hopefully, the same way that if you're making a marketing campaign, you're telling the brand, hey, I will do this. 90% of people will love my post, but then 10% of people will absolutely hate it. You're prepping them for the potential negative feedback.
Yep.
Same thing for the audience when it comes to medical knowledge. And I've seen this play out on Twitter with some infectious disease docs that I'm friendly with up north in Canada, and they're getting absolutely destroyed for things that they've said in the news unfairly when they're presenting a very balanced, nuanced approach, and it's not one way or the highway. Exactly what we've been talking about. Let's move off actually the pandemic, because I think it's people are probably
they're tired
pandemic
of
tired. There are 3 subjects that you guys wanted to discuss today that you're feeling is very prevalent in science communication, maybe in the health, wellness, woo-woo space, dare I say.
Yeah.
What's one of those topics?
So I think the first, and actually, this really kind of goes back to a lot of what we've been discussing, but it's the concept that, people will co-opt a legitimate scientific term, something that's happening on a cellular level or an organism level, and they co-opt it to explain away a whole slew of ailments. And, one of the terms of the day is inflammation, right? So inflammation is a normal process of the body. It needs to happen for
many
life,
reasons,
for life. Yeah. It's balanced by the anti-inflammatory responses, but you find even scientists, even clinicians, definitely the general public, definitely like the wellness influencers use it as a way to explain or create in some ways new medical issues, right? So, you have GI issues, it's inflammation. Oh, you have brain fog, oh, it's inflammation. Oh, you have this, oh, it's inflammation. Like, it's not, again, nuanced, multifactorial. If you didn't have inflammation in your body, certain cellular processes would not exist. Every time you literally consume something, you generate inflammation because you're breaking down a large molecule into smaller molecules. That's a catabolic
Are you
process.
launching a PR campaign for inflammation right now?
Yeah, do a
You're
shot
like,
every time she says.
inflammation is not always bad. No,
Well,
is
no,
that
it's
true?
true. It's true. It's
so you're
absolutely
saying
true.
people have villainized inflammation
Yes.
to make it like a buzzword for every
Yes.
condition.
Correct.
And while it's true, inflammation occurs in a lot of those issues.
It's always balanced.
Yeah, it also occurs in
Right.
other things that are very good.
Yeah, and also like the most inflammatory thing that you could do as a person is exercise.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
or get an infection and need inflammation.
Right. You need inflammation to counteract.
Yeah.
So, it's very frustrating as an immunologist because, a lot of the other buzzwords that come along with it, like autophagy and free radical, like these are all like words that have meaning in science, but
they're sexy words.
Yeah. But don't have meaning when they're being applied in like the health and wellness space. And it's leading to a lot of like cropping up of faux medical diagnosis, a lot of pseudoscience, and of course it's preying into these
something
people.
down. Give me some pseudoscience diagnoses.
Well, so like the leaky gut syndrome.
Okay.
That's one that is
Adrenal
often.
fatigue.
What do people say about leaky gut? Let's define it for the
So
audience.
people are claiming that leaky gut syndrome is an issue where your intestinal cells become permeable so that food bits and toxins are leaking out from your GI tract into your bloodstream and are leading to inflammation. And that's why you have all these symptoms: fatigue, lethargy, brain fog, headache, bloating, diarrhea, whatever, like every symptom under the sun.
Fair.
So intestinal permeability is a scientific term because your cells are not cemented to each other. They have little junctions, little proteins that are like little gaps, and that actually allows the transport of
Nutrients.
molecules that you need, but it's not allowing food bits and bacteria and toxins to leak into your bloodstream. And so again, scientific term got co-opted for the wellness, and now they're diagnosing this or self-diagnosing it and then selling supplements to cure your leaky gut because it's all due to this inflammation.
Got it. So they've kidnapped the word inflammation, created a condition called leaky gut that people have real symptoms for. And instead of getting the treatment and diagnosis of what their symptoms are coming from,
correct,
they're getting this faux diagnosis, leading them to missing the proper treatment, which is the big problem.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's the big problem that I have is that they're getting preyed upon by these people that are making a profit.
Well, that's the thing. They're all vilifying pharma and industry because it's for profit. What do you think the wellness industry is? I mean, everything. I'm sorry. Are people so naive? Everything is for profit. Like, we don't work for free. I don't understand this concept. It's the most frustrating thing in the world, and love to talk more about that. But yes, so then it gets co-opted by the wellness industry. And my big thing, I guess, related is this natural and the appeal to nature fallacy, and that everything that's natural and clean is automatically better for us, and that anything that's synthetic or made in a lab is just it's bad for us. It's toxic and it's full of chemicals. And we always say everything is a chemical. And of course, that's not true. And the example we once gave is that, was it willow bark?
Yeah,
What is that thing?
Salicylate,
There you
which
go.
is now, now we've synthesized it into aspirin.
So people were chewing on willow bark, eating willow bark for pain relief. And that was great, but they were, pooping their brains out, vomiting. There were all these GI side effects. And now we're able to concentrate it in a lab, get rid of all the stuff that was making people violently ill. And also, spoiler alert, by synthesizing things in a lab, we're preserving nature because we don't need to destroy nature. We're able to. So I just don't understand. I feel like we're, as a society, moving towards this idea that everything that's a drug or synthesized or made in a lab, manufactured, is automatically bad for us. And this wellness industry, multi-billion-dollar, booming, based on this premise. So that's my
and the reality of the wellness, quote unquote, wellness space is the supplements they make are
not
chemicals.
Regulated by the
well, yes, but
they're synthesized.
Specifically, they're synthesized and purified in the same ways that
they're made in the lab.
No, not even in the same ways. In worse ways, because there's no oversight,
no quality control.
Exactly,
yes.
exactly.
And that, like the appeal to nature fallacy. I mean, it's everywhere, right? Like, I only want all natural ingredients. It's like, well, arsenic is all natural too, and botulism toxin is all natural too, and again, those have higher toxicity than a lot of synthetic things.
So I have someone in my family, I'm not going to say anything more than that, who was just diagnosed with Graves' disease.
Okay.
And, her whole thing is that she does not want to take any medication for it because it's synthetic. And she only wants to go on the AIP, the
autoimmune protocol diet.
She's going gluten-free.
Which we've covered on our podcast.
She's going gluten-free, dairy-free, and she's only doing homeopathy. I mean, you as a clinician, like, I'm sure you deal. I'm sorry, I'm asking you a question.
Yeah, but ask me a question.
But like, how do you deal? I'm sure you get a lot of people who come in and are like, oh no, I don't want to treat that with medicine. It's toxic. It's bad for me. I want to treat it naturally. I mean, do you get that a lot?
All the time, in ways on both sides of that equation.
Okay.
So I'll have people come in and say, I don't want the pill for this. I want the natural approach. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I have me saying, you don't need antibiotics for this.
And they're demanding,
requesting-
Yes. We talk
Or
about
I'm
that.
depressed and I'm like, okay, well, we need to do some therapy, some
Right.
talk therapy.
And they're like, no, just give me
I
the
want
pill.
the pill.
Yeah.
Right.
So it happens on both ends.
Right.
For sure.
Which is why the pendulum, again, I'm trying to bring it back
Yes.
to the middle.
And it's multifactorial because, it's like I want to tell her, we're not saying that you take a pill for everything. I mean, a medication helps people, all the time. But yes, there are other things, other factors, other lifestyle changes that we could make. It's not like we're saying you take a pill, you take medicine, it'll fix it. And then to your point, you're right. On the other side of it, people, like I know my best friend's a pediatrician, and she said, like, parents come in, they want to leave with a prescription. You want to feel like you're doing something tangible to make your child better, yourself feel better. So they'll, they're prescribing medications and antibiotics even when they know this is viral and antibiotic is not going to do anything.
Yeah. Another one of my friends, actually, it was he was a med student when I was doing my PhD, and we taught clinical microbiology to the second year med students. And he's an emergency room physician in Arkansas now. And he was like, I'm guilty of prescribing antibiotics when I know I don't need to, because they come into the ED and they want something to lead with.
And you want a good Yelp
Yes.
review.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the way that I try and position myself in times where a patient might come in and want something natural or have a distrust of the medical system, I try and put myself in their shoes as much as possible and figure out what is the cause of this.
Yes.
And as a person who's experienced a decent amount of life in my young age of 33, I have still seen what they have seen, which is doctors don't spend enough time. They want to make a quick diagnosis. They want to throw a pill at it because we don't have the time to discuss lifestyle modifications, to debate lifestyle modifications, to see if the patient is actually doing this because we don't have enough appointment slots available for follow-ups. So as a result, I get why people believe in the naturopathic cure, so everything better than the modern system.
We talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the
people-
healthcare industry has a lot of flaws, and that's a topic
exactly.
for
And
another.
people are suffering. There are chronic issues. There are major problems with our healthcare system. And I hate when people come in and are fighting with my husband and blaming him. It's like first of all, he's getting chastised from the higher ups, from the administration. Move fast, see as many people as possible. He wants to spend more time talking to his patients. So we get why some people are drawn to like naturopathy and chiropractic and, stuff like that. And we just want to educate people like, okay, we understand why you're drawn to it. There are problems, but the evidence is just not there to support it. And if you're foregoing actual necessary medical treatment and care, that's the problem.
Right.
You want to put onions on your feet? That's fine. If you're sick, that's fine. But if you're not getting your kid an antibiotic, if they need it for a bacterial infection, that is a problem.
Yeah, this is where my sort of clinician hat gets put on and my scientist hat comes off, because guidance general for the population might be, okay, get this patient, thyroid replacement medication, but patient wants to do this unique diet. The treatment says only do the pill, not the diet. But now for this patient, I will try and find some level of middle ground.
Sure.
Where, okay, maybe we don't have to take the dose that I was going to start you on. Let's start on a lower dose, recheck, and make some. This is against what the evidence shows.
Yes.
But I'm doing this with
well,
the
you want to
knowledge.
get trust.
I want to get trust.
You want to
and
get buy-in.
make my way to
Right.
the time.
Because presumably you know, or at least have an inkling that the other modifications are not going to be as effective. And so eventually
course.
you're going to have to get them up to that dose, but you have to take baby steps
Right.
because they're not there.
You're being practical and realistic. You want some adherence, better some medication. Let's start them, than just having them completely say, okay, this doctor is not listening to me at all. He's not hearing me. He's not
And we
hearing
want
what
to
I'm
be
saying.
heard.
Right. Exactly. So we totally get that. Andrea, you sometimes though, and I love to talk about this, like the slippery slope, like we sort of try to figure out like, do you want to talk? Is it okay if we talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay. How like, sometimes people will come for us. It's like, well, you can't say blanketly that like, chiropractic is bad and acupuncture is bad and all this and that. And like, it's true. Like there is no evidence, right? So we don't want we're not condoning it because there really is no evidence to support its use. But then if we say like, don't do it, it's not helpful, like people
so
shut down.
we try to, approach it from like a risk like there are some legitimate risks with X, Y, or Z.
Right.
The data don't support it.
Right.
We've done a lot on the placebo effect, which, we kind of discussed earlier on
Right.
here that, if people believe that they're getting something that's going to help them feel better, and sometimes it can also contribute to that. And a lot of people, they're like, well, I took the supplement and I felt better. And it's like, well, you could have been at the end of your infectious illness to begin with. And so it's just a matter of time. But we're trying to get people to think more critically about those sorts of things. And, the wellness industry plays on this like desire to get a quick fix, right? They're like, well, you're going to take this, that, and the other.
The reason why they're quote unquote winning is because the wellness industry, you're requiring people to think critically at a time where they're exhausted, they're tired, they have a lot of stuff going on, and maybe they don't have the health background to know.
Right.
And then the wellness industry is simplifying and asking them to not think critically and saying, here, we've already solved this for you.
Just take this.
And then we expect people to be like, wait, why don't you agree with us?
But what's interesting, and I would love your thought on this, is that, so you said, you have people, they come to you, they don't want to take a pill. But then the wellness industry packages up a pill of herbs or whatever and are like, take this pill, and they're much more inclined to take that.
That's what I would explore. That's what happens in my visits. So just my last guest on the podcast was Angela Johnson-Reyes, and she was telling me about how she prefers this naturopathic approach. And it would have been very easy for me in that moment to point out and say why her thing isn't proven to do what it's doing for her. But what do I win by doing that outside of making myself feel good that I'm morally superior or not morally knowledgeable superior, whatever? It gives nothing to the conversation. So instead, the conversation changed to what happened that she went this route. And she started telling me all those stories of doctors neglecting her, not answering her questions, jumping to medications, giving her an antibiotic when they were like, I don't really know if you need an antibiotic. And now all of a sudden, I can then create some education, not even in the moment of where we disagree, but in general, why my mindset is negative on an industry, higher on this industry, and we can create a level of common ground instead of constantly putting stones in our path.
Yeah. And I think, it's a broader issue. Like, we know there are flaws in the healthcare industry. Often scientists get conflated with the healthcare industry, which we're typically not, directly involved with. And clinicians often get lumped into the category of, I had this one bad clinician that ignored my complaints. They didn't believe when I said my pain was at an 8. They didn't do this. And then that leads to a general mistrust of all healthcare providers, which is a whole other, issue that needs to be addressed.
I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah.
I think if you've been in one crap situation and then you're put in that same exact situation, the fact that you're experiencing the same set of feelings that you did on the previous one is almost human.
Yeah.
And for us as doctors to not believe it or be confused by it is weird.
Right. Well, people always have risk aversion and aversion to negative experiences, right?
Exactly.
Like, think about, like, you go to a particular type of food restaurant, you had a really bad meal, like, the next time you're thinking about a restaurant, like, you might not even look at that type of cuisine, not even just that restaurant, right?
That's how the mind works.
Yeah.
And we've seen that even like in animal mouse studies or rat studies. Being someone that has studied medical history to some degree, mostly for the YouTube channel, not because I'm smart again, I've seen how science gets really overconfident at times.
Yes.
And I have to be open to the idea that things change, and not just data like improving, but also breakthroughs in how treatments that we once believed to be really good are not really good, or something that we believe to be bogus actually got some proof behind it.
Yep.
So when I hear like the topic of, let's say, acupuncture come up, and I have a patient who's trying to skip surgery because we've seen negative outcomes in their specific instance with musculoskeletal surgery. And they said, I've tried physical therapy, I've tried epidural injections, I've tried this. Do you think I could try acupuncture? I think it works. And they try it. I, in this situation as a doctor, have to think about, okay, what is the risk of them trying acupuncture and not overplay it, the risk?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy as a doctor to be like, this is risky for no reason.
Right.
It's not risky for no reason. Even if you believe acupuncture doesn't work as a doctor, there's a 30% chance it'll work because of placebo effect.
Right.
Now you have to think, if they can get a 30% benefit from this, that they believe in acupuncture, what is the true risk that they're experiencing? And the risk is quite low. So that's why I say, I think it's worth a try.
Well,
But would you agree with that?
Well, so, we actually did an episode on acupuncture. Okay. And I, our general conclusion when you look at the evidence is, yes, the risk is pretty low. There are some documented really severe adverse events like pneumothorax because the, needles are placed inappropriately. But if you look at kind of like the realm of pseudoscience, I guess we can kind of lump that into that bucket.
We're going to get attacked for that.
No.
Yeah, I wouldn't put acupuncture in
not.
pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is made up.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So alternative therapy. Yeah.
Integrative.
Yeah. In the bucket of all of those options, the risk of acupuncture is low. And again, there could be a potential benefit per placebo. I think there was a little bit of evidence that for certain particular conditions, especially when coupled with other modalities like physical therapy, it actually did have a benefit. And I think if you are an individual and your option is invasive surgery with long recovery and maybe trying this for 8 weeks, and the risk is low and you make that personal risk assessment.
That's why I don't destroy integrative therapies. Simply on what you just said. Mm-hmm. And there are doctors in this space who will say never.
Yeah.
It's quackery, they'll downplay. And I understand where they're coming from. But at the same time, I got to think of that practical implication that you just referenced.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like we're now kind of labeled as like the bitches of psychology, and like we like.
Wow, okay.
I'm sorry.
You're unbiased science, not bitches of
I'm not self-labeling, Andrew. I'm telling you, people call us this, and that we've just like shoot down anything that's alternative.
Yes,
and I need people to understand, like, it's because we're coming from the perspective of scientists, and there's not a whole lot of evidence for it. And you, as a clinician, I understand why you're maybe more open-minded to it and trying to establish a connection with the patient. You don't want them to shut down completely, and
you need them to buy into your recommendations.
Context is different. From an evidence point of view, there's not a whole lot of evidence for its use. Right. And I worry
as a population.
Yes.
But then what individually?
Exactly.
And we're working on a post about clinicians versus scientists and how it's individual versus population.
Right. Well, exactly. And people like we're describing, our goal is to describe the average. And yes, there are outliers. I don't know. It's such a different different world. And I think
it's also a different end goal, right?
Yeah. Yes.
It's a different end goal.
Yes.
So the approach will be different.
I don't want us to be seen as like just being anti all these things. It's just that we're trying to educate people on the available evidence. And then, but by the same coin, it's like, are we also eroding then the impact of the potential placebo effect by telling people,
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's that dramatic.
No, because I think,
I think your job is to be unbiased and fair.
And so I think most people are like, yeah, we get this. And we always try and balance it with potential risk. So like if the potential risk is low, then, that's fine. But like a lot of times it's like, well, you don't need to waste your money on this supplement because there's no evidence to support its use. And a lot of it is like, people are spending thousands of dollars on these things that are being sold to them on social media.
And our issue, like, we're not judging the people who are taking these things and trying these therapies or whatever, alternative therapy, because again, I understand, like, I saw my dad struggle with emphysema and cancer. And like, we were thinking like, are there, like for a time we were thinking like, okay, the treatments aren't working. Like, should we explore these things?
Outside the box, yeah.
I understand that mindset of desperation and of chronic pain and fear. I get that. Where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought.
About balancing it with
evidence. I don't know.
And not judging the people.
Oh, and sorry, thank you.
Yes, we're not judging the people. It's about the industry that's preying.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I do this all the time, and she has to finish my thoughts. So we're not judging the people, but I think oftentimes people come at us like, you're being so rude and you're judging us and you're. No, it's the industry and the charlatans and the snake oil salesmen. That's what frustrates us. They know there's no evidence.
The way that I pose it to someone who is a firm believer in supplements and believes that they work for all of these issues is if you walk into a supplement store, there's a supplement to cure aging, there's a supplement to cure ugliness, there's a supplement to cure sex drive, and yet we're all suffering with those things still, and every person in that store still has all those
Yes.
So like that's my thing. I'm like, if it worked, then everyone in the supplement store would be the strongest,
they would
fastest,
be gorgeous,
having the best sex,
invincible, and
living forever,
no gray hair.
So like I hope that I can just induce skepticism on that point alone.
It's a great tactic, and we try and approach it. Okay, well, this is the evidence, if this was, there's a reason that they have to use these buzzwords, right? There's a reason that they have to sell it in this way because there isn't the data to support it.
And we're not in front of a patient like you are. Like, it's different for us when we're presenting information. Like, we don't have that same relationship with people. So I really do understand like what you're saying, and I respect it.
I think what we're all coming back to the point is that this is a collaborative effort. I'm not going to try and run scientific rigorous trials because I'm not good at setting up those trials. And on your end, making the deduction on which individual level to make these recommendations probably doesn't make sense either.
Right.
So
that's not our
that's
place.
why we team up to do it in that way.
And that's how it should be.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, you know, and I think social media certainly has accelerated it, but the pitting of each other against each other is
I think a good title for this podcast is like Doctor versus Scientist.
Ooh, oh gosh. Okay.
That way it sounds a little salacious. But
Yes.
but it's not actually.
it's quite unified. I was going to just share a
Spoiler
quick
alert.
story of how, for placebo effect to work, you have to believe in it and all these things that we know. Well, I never believed in acupuncture, and I had a torn labrum in my left shoulder.
Oh, me too.
Really?
My right though.
Okay, so
I had
left.
surgery.
Ooh. Okay. So here's what I did. I had this issue for 3-4 years, probably from being a goalkeeper landing on an outstretched arm or maybe bench pressing incorrectly. And I had it for a long time. It never really went away. There was maybe a day that it wouldn't be so bad, but it would constantly lock and catch. And then my dad took me to his friend who's a pain management doctor who also did some acupuncture. He did one session and I didn't believe in it. I was like, what is this ridiculousness? I didn't have pain for 10 years.
Really?
And I don't know how to wrap my head around that as a physician who I can't understand the pathway of how this worked. And then I had a same instance. I had a medial epicondylitis, not tennis elbow, golfer's elbow from boxing. And I went, I'm like, you know what? This has been going on really long. Let me try acupuncture because it worked for my shoulder 10 years ago. I went, first session, 85% relief of symptoms despite physical therapy failing, meloxicam failing, all these things that I tried. And then this is where it gets tricky. I went for the second acupuncture session for the elbow when I probably shouldn't have. It was already so much better. But the person said, come back for a second session to make it 100%. He hit my nerve.
It got worse.
And I had ulnar nerve neuropathy that was terrible for like 6 weeks that I had to seek second opinions for. My nerve was lighting up. So it goes to show.
Yeah.
Can
The
work.
risks are not.
And
well,
the risks are there.
Right. So I'll tell you my story about so I used to be a competitive judo player.
Okay.
Player?
Yeah. Is that
fighter, whatever. Yeah.
Give yourself the
Judo.
credit.
Fighter. I used
Fighter.
to beat the crap out of people.
Okay.
Don't mess with
Player.
Andrea.
She's like, I was a player.
And so I tore my labrum. I was going to throw somebody and, you know, my arm was here and their body went that way. And anyway, so it was like an acute slap tear and I didn't want to get surgery because, you know, I knew it was going to be an impediment and I did physical therapy and it helped a little bit. And then I postponed it for 10 years probably. And then it got to the point where my biceps tendon like basically
Started suffering as a
completely
result,
frayed. And so they had to slap it all together again. But I ended up finally giving in and getting the surgery in grad school. And so I remember I was in my sling and I was pipetting with, I'm a lefty. So it actually, but I drove stick shift and I had to trade cars with my dad because I couldn't shift when I was in a sling for a month. But I didn't try acupuncture. I just tried physical therapy and it wasn't enough.
Imagine it worked.
Did it work?
Imagine it worked.
Oh, imagine
No,
it
imagine
worked.
it worked. You would have saved the surgery. You could have pipetted.
I could have
and drove
pipetted
stick
with
shift.
both hands. But yeah.
But it's interesting. And I
it is
also
interesting.
had the same thing happen. And I'm also an osteopathic physician, so I'm a DO. So we have some extra hands-on stuff, but none of it is magical. It's all based on like physical therapy-esque reflexes of the human body. And we see people get better from things that they really shouldn't be getting better from all the time. I had Osgood-Schlatter growing up where I had this like inflammation below my knee. And that's very common in young folks and adolescents to experience this. And it hurt for like 4 years. Every time I played basketball, it was a chronic issue, whether it was Osgood-Schlatter or jumper's knee, same thing basically. And I saw KT taping was getting hot. And KT taping
it's very popular in
looks
the
very
running community.
magical. It looks cool, like different colors. It got me excited about it. I was young. I was like 21 at the time. I put on KT tape. I did it the way that they said for the knee. And I wore it for 7 days, showered with it, all of it. it never hurt again for the rest of my life. I need an explanation. I didn't believe in it.
So I started taping my shoulder after.
What happened, evidence-based medicine scientists?
Well, it was during the same fanaticism when there wasn't evidence.
Okay.
But it's sticky tape, right? It's sticky, stretchy tape that, and they were like, well, if you tape it tight enough, it might help hold it in place when you're recovering post-surgery. Yeah. And it's so popular with the elite runners now. But yeah, there's not a lot of evidence behind it. There's not a lot of explanation as to why it would help behind it.
It cured me. How?
See, it didn't cure me.
Oh, okay.
It didn't cure me.
He wants an answer. How did it cure him?
I
don't have an answer either.
That's your
That's my humility of medicine has to be like, okay, like, look, it cured me. And I would be the first person that if a patient brought that in, I'll be like, come on. Right. But it cured me and it worked. So like I have to be.
What color KT tape did you pick?
It was just black. It was basic. It wasn't even fancy.
Science needs that humility too. Yes. And like we've done posts like science isn't perfect,
Yeah.
So
because it's sexy to say trust the science.
I know. We used to use that hashtag trust
it's
science.
It's also
beautiful,
sexy for like a wellness influencer to say like, all food is toxic and poisoning.
Well,
everything is toxic depending on the dose.
At the dose.
Oh
my goodness. Well, there's a post that we're going to be debunking soon, and it's like,
sub in for all your organic counterparts because they're non-GMO.
Right. Well, so they show all these things, and the takeaway is eat organic because this thing has GMO. This has red dye. So what?
None of those things are detrimental.
Yeah. Why are we vilifying these things? So, but anyway, again, I don't even know why I said that. I keep losing my train of thought.
Don't vilify the things.
Don't vilify. But
no,
there was another point. Humility. Science isn't perfect. I don't know. Anyway,
and science is sexy, or
science is because it's sexy to say those things and just it seems
to create uproar. Wow.
Right. And this person has 1 million followers on Instagram. It's getting reshared, and then we have a very boring post about how GMOs are not inherently bad and how dyes are not and. That doesn't get shared 1 million times. It just doesn't because her post is sexier. So we have to figure out how to make science sexy.
Well, maybe this is not the solution for you, but this was my solution for society that I could come up with. I have been able to get a pretty big social media following with never straying from evidence-based recommendations on the channel, which is almost unheard of because most people who are medical influencers who have millions of followers are usually sharing some kind of BS.
Right.
They're hawking a product or
Yes,
something.
exactly. They're doing that. That's like that Dr. Oz thing that constantly comes up.
Don't even get me started. I live in Pennsylvania. He's not even from there.
Your struggle. And I've also, to be fair, when I was a resident, he invited me on his show, and I went on to talk about a program I piloted in my hospital with doctors working out with their patients. So at least like he gave the evidence-based doctors a chance sometimes. So I'll just say that.
Once upon a time, he was not
and he was a great
charlatan.
cardiothoracic surgeon.
Right.
He trained in my hospital, and there's countless physicians that said he did amazing surgery. So something happened.
Right.
Yes.
Something happened.
Something changed. Evidence changed, and we learned.
Or the greed.
No, meaning our evidence of what he was doing. That's why our judgment has changed.
We both were like on you.
And I decided to create a course for professionals, whether you're medicine, a lawyer, a bookkeeper, and you want to put out evidence-based good info, and you don't know how to do it through media or social media. I kind of created a playbook of how you can do it and be successful. That's my thing. Because otherwise, what I see young doctors doing is either selling out to the bunk and selling the nonsense miracle cure stuff, or they go into this, I'm going to do call-out culture and join TikToxic and yell at these people.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I hate. I mean,
I feel like don't do that. There's a middle ground.
We don't want
to be successful.
We don't want to do
financially
any of that.
well off.
Yeah.
You can do all.
We get offers all the time. And this is what I wish people understood. Like, oh, you could make so and so amount of money if you push this product. And
we're like,
say,
no, we're not. We're
not going to do that.
But if the product was good and evidence based,
if
we
it
would
was
do
good,
it.
we would.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, the public thinks there's something wrong with it. I know we know there's nothing wrong with it.
And we've all like
we have to make a living.
Things that we've been, that we've partnered with companies.
I have to make a pause again. I think scientific minds are corrupting you right now. Do you really think all of your audience is upset when you make money?
No.
Not all of them.
It's the
how many of them percentage wise?
I think it's a very small percentage.
Exactly. So why are you upset by it?
I get upset by it.
Jess gets upset.
I'm a people pleaser. I don't know what's
But
wrong
you
with
can't
me.
please
And I tell
100%.
her,
And you know
I
what
tell
it
her
is?
to stay off comments.
Because I know how pure our intentions are, and like
it hurts her. It hurts her as a person.
No, it really does. It offends me because we could be making the quick cash. And like, I'm going to be real with you. Pfizer and Moderna, they have foundations. We talk all the time about vaccines. We have not taken a penny from Pfizer and Moderna, but like, it's like if they have foundations and we could apply for a grant where we are getting funding to do the SciComm that we're now doing for free, why should we say no to that?
Yeah.
And I don't like that's my struggle.
You know, and the thing is the critics are going to be the ones that are going to dogpile and comment, and you know, it's going to be a very small proportion. And I try.
They're the louder.
Yes, they're very. Yeah, they're loud and they're the minority.
Effective because we're humans and we have a negativity bias.
So I try to tell her, turn off
We work
notifications, don't read the comments.
Like, we don't eat, we don't sleep, we don't shower. We both have
You don't
full-time
eat?
jobs. Sometimes
Okay,
and
I eat
whatever.
ice cream daily.
No, yeah. But my point is like I just
My doctor mind turned on real
knowing what goes into what we do, it hits a nerve in me,
course.
and I don't know how I have to stop myself from doing that. And also,
she has to stop reading the comments, is what she has to.
But
stop
also,
doing.
we should be compensated for our time and expertise, and so
I think this is the reassurance I'll give you
I
because
need
I
this.
am same position as you are.
Okay.
I get very upset when I read the comments. Sam frequently tells me never read the comments. Mike, stop reading the comments.
Smart man.
There was a period of time where I needed to literally go to therapy, and part of the advice of the therapy was to at night not read comments. And my critique of that advice was initially that that's avoidance behavior. We shouldn't practice avoidance behavior.
Right.
And she taught me
Mm-hmm.
that avoidance behavior done recklessly could be problematic.
Sure.
Right.
But if it's targeted at something that you see as a problem for you, it might be a good behavior and a good coping mechanism.
Yep. I've actually taken the practice of not trying to get off social media like after 8 p.m. Like my job, I often work long hours, and so I will be online officially, you know, in the evenings, but I've started, especially recently, just staying off. And sometimes Jess will like screenshot a comment or a message. And often I just don't even acknowledge them anymore because it adds to my anxiety. And I have to disconnect. Otherwise, like I don't sleep. I already take trazodone to sleep.
Right.
And I have to shut that part of my brain off.
You don't know how many times we've considered like just shutting down the page. Like it's like this is just.
Please don't.
You know what it is?
We need you.
It's tough because
Us simple clinicians need the smart
our
scientists.
name is not helping us though. Like, and I love our name.
I had a
Unbiased
really clever name when we first.
What?
Well, I wanted to do like a play on like, you know, show me the data, or like there was like some other. Remember, like
I
once
thought I came up with show me.
I don't
the
remember, but
data.
there was a bunch of ones that we were
Judo match.
that we were
I would
throwing
lose.
around.
very much lose.
but you know, we had to also factor in the fact that it was her data analytics firm that was kind of, you know, bankrolling the podcast in the first place, and you know there were other people involved in some of the decision making, and so we couldn't be as witty or, you know,
Well, and also trying to find it, like we are in two very different scientific fields, so trying to like find a common ground.
Like I wanted to do some like cell
she
biology
had some things. I was like, I don't know what the hell you're talking
fun
about.
names.
Yeah, I don't know, like whatever. Anyway, you hear she talks. She's a very very technical. That's why we're a good team. I'm more big picture. So what do you think? I'm curious for your input. We're Unbiased Science. And all the time we hear more like biased science. I mean, you don't even know. What if Moderna and Pfizer, their foundations, funded us not to, you know, get the Pfizer or bivalent? We would never do something we just wouldn't do that. But to help fund our education efforts, should we take it, or would that be like SciComm suicide? I don't want to put you. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
For you, it might hurt, but in general, no.
Okay.
Meaning for you, knowing your personality as you've shown it today.
Oh, me personally.
Yes,
Okay.
It might be hard for you to function in that space now.
Okay. But what about
like for
individual?
me, though?
So individual general advice. No, it's not suicide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Individual advice, might not be great.
Okay.
That's my clinician.
Okay. Because I feel like we would be very transparent. Like
I would be fine with it.
Anytime we do a sponsorship,
You're very clear.
It's always like
she sometimes is over.
I know. I think I
about
see.
it.
Like we just did. I know. I don't
do
want
it,
to talk
do it.
too long, but like we just did a podcast on infant feeding. We brought on 2 pediatricians. We all happen to be scientific advisors
Except for
except for Andrea, for Bobby, but we're Bobby Labs, which is the scientific arm of this formula company. They didn't even pay us to do the podcast. There was no payment. There was no script. It was just, I felt it was important to disclose that we do have this advisory relationship with Bobby, because I had, people look us up and they're like, oh, look, formula shill, there's a relationship. So I maybe
No one's looking
over
it up.
disclose.
Yeah.
There are people.
5 people.
Yeah,
Okay,
five people.
Right.
Who are
And
you
they're the ones that
educating?
comment.
Who are
Right,
you
right.
educating?
Okay,
Right.
so maybe I'm over disclosing. Okay, this is
No, you're not
I think-
over disclosing. Good. Do this when a scientist
I mean,
at a presentation.
disclosures is fine.
Yeah, you went to
do have
so
to
many
disclose.
of these
but
things.
but I don't think you have to go and explain it away.
You don't
in the
have to fall on the
stories.
knife.
Yeah, you don't have
Okay.
to. You don't have to follow it up with like, okay, we didn't take a penny, we didn't do just say it.
Short of
That's it.
giving a copy of the agreement to the public, I've thought about that.
don't need
Literally, no one
No,
is
you
giving
don't
us
need
a
to do
script. We are in control of everything we're saying. We didn't even.
If you were shady, the
Yeah.
audience would know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when I say the audience,
And
that's the
also-
majority of the audience.
Right, and you have to remember like how many followers there are versus how many are the people that are
Comments,
actually
yeah.
This is
dogpiling
like a
in the
therapy
comments.
session.
No,
me.
it's
Thank
very
you, Dr.
hard.
Mike.
It's
Yeah.
very hard because I struggle with the same thing. That's why I can speak to it this
Right.
much. But I even just did a campaign right now with like the COVID-19 vaccine project, where they reached out to us to do sponsored posts for the vaccine. I'm like, I don't want to take money for the vaccine, not because I'm high and mighty, just because I don't even want to create that relationship for people. So I said, I'll do it. You could use my image. I'll post about it, but use the money to buy space in newspapers or billboards or whatever it is to put the message out there.
Got it.
So like, you don't have to fall on the knife every
Right.
time.
Well,
you just
and
have
you
to
know-
be forthcoming. And once you are,
And we
you're an
are.
open book,
Yeah, yeah.
people will see it. It's like when you step into a room with someone and you spend an hour with them, how soon do you know they're full of shit?
Immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah.
That's what your
Right.
audience is doing. So you don't have to
Right.
worry.
And
if
there
you
are-
make a mistake, it's okay.
Right, and there are people that follow just to be a troll, and those are going to be
Exactly.
the ones you know.
so mean.
So you don't have to engage with them because that's just giving them
Like,
energy.
tonight, we're doing a partnership with, it might be the group you're talking
Yeah,
about.
the COVID vaccine equity project.
Oh, yes, that's the project.
Yeah, so the AAFP board chair Sterling Ranson, he's gonna come on and chat with
So
us.
Tell me that
they get funding from.
They get funding
Yeah,
from
pharma.
right,
Yeah.
Novartis.
We
and-
were in fun.
yeah.
But again, no one told us what to say. We're just educating the public. It's just,
And we're just having a discussion
But
with,
of course,
you know,
people focused on that, and we had
It's
some
not people.
comments.
No,
Okay.
it was person. It
No,
was
no.
actually one person.
From now
it was
on,
one
when you
person.
say people,
Yes.
this is an easy
Okay.
trick and something I
Tell
started
me.
doing. Say minority.
Minority.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just say
And
minority,
also-
focus on
and
both.
also
And now it takes
same
the power.
same with like when you're like, oh, the comments are coming in hot. Like it's 3 people.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, people.
The
Okay.
only time where I actually get upset with the minority is the situation of
When
how
it's
we
your
met
peers. Yeah.
when it's your peers, and that's when
Yeah.
I get really
But it's
upset.
not your peers.
Well, that
it's
was like
randos.
the post on Ozempic or whatever.
No, because those weren't our
Okay.
peers either.
Some pharmacist and MD. Okay. Well, there was, who, but okay. We're not going to talk about her.
But yes, so as you can tell, it's a very complicated space to exist in.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'm glad we share all these trials and tribulations, even though we're on opposite ends of this collaborative spectrum
Yes.
of clinicians and
But it's
scientists.
collaborative, so you know.
Exactly.
It
More
could be
of
a
this.
it could be a circle.
Yes, more of this.
You know, if you have a line and
We're
you
a
bend it,
Venn
then it's a
diagram.
circle. There you
Yes.
go. Yeah, it should be.
This is a
Venn
triple
diagram.
Venn diagram.
Yes.
If I was having an aerial view, it would be
There you go.
more
I like
overlap
that.
than not. Yeah.
Yep.
Love
Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank
Appreciate
you
for
you
having
so
us.
much for
Keep up
having
the good
us.
work. Don't stop. You're not allowed to.
Okay.
If there's a point where you want to stop, you DM me and say we want to stop.
No, I
And I'll
can't.
fight you.
Okay.
I can't. I just accepted
She has
this.
a torn labrum. I know her weakness
No,
on
no,
the right
it's healed
side.
now. I had surgery. It's,
No, I'll break it.
it's still crackly a little bit.
Where can people go to learn more about you?
You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Unbiased Sci Pod. Our website is www.unbiasedscipod.com, and we have a Substack where you can subscribe. It gives you access to our monthly live Q&As and our private Facebook group, and that is theunbiasedscipod.substack.com.
We have show notes for everything. Everything we say is evidence-based. We give the links to the primary sources that we use. We also have, I said show notes, but we have a database, a searchable database that you'll see on our website where you could actually search by keyword if you have a question about a particular topic.
I love it.
Yes.
For those who wanted to see my response to the RSV controversy, click here. You get to see all the negative comments people wrote about me. And as always, stay happy and healthy.